Hello and welcome to the Sexient Beings sessions. Today we're here to talk about dominance and submission. I'm Alix Pruett, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach with a BDSM and kink focus. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to transform their old patterns, pain, and beliefs so they can create thriving relationships that are deeply connected, playful, and fulfilling within themselves and with others. So, the topic of dominance and submission is very near and dear to my heart. I've explored this area in interpersonal relationships, in research and studies, from how it shows up in communication styles to kinky play, sexual play, um, within societal structures and dynamics that way. And there are some key things that I've noticed through observing society and relationships that tend to show up in dynamics of dominance and submission that tend to lead to toxic relationships or unfulfilling relationships, things that can start delving into the realms of abuse. And what I want to help people do is create a new frame so you can move out of the toxic sides of it and into those more playful areas that are fulfilling and really carry a lot of enjoyment, even if they have things that don't feel comfortable or what's the word? Even if they don't feel comfortable, or if they're painful, that you're supported in that because we're never going to get rid of instances of pain and discomfort or even fear, but you can learn how to work with it, learn how to bring that support into your relationships. But in my own experience, that starts with doing that within ourselves first. So let's first start out with some of these like bigger red flags I've noticed. And keep in mind, this will apply to both a dominant and submissive, but there are certain ones that tend to pop uh, more so for certain identities. So there will be times where I'm talking about a dominant and it's showing up within their behavior patterns. It can also show up in the submissive side. It's just more likely to show up in the dominant side. That's at least where I have observed it or seen it talked about the most. So take it how it applies to you. Um, so let's get into this. I would say one of the biggest things, and again, this applies to the dominant or submissive, as far as a big red flag that stands out is when it comes to talking about soft limits, hard limits, personal boundaries. So if you are about to step into a dynamic with a person where you're playing in these DS spaces and they say they have no limits whatsoever, I want to give everyone the grace for themselves to take a step back and take that as a forewarning that maybe this isn't the person to play with. We all have our own limits. We all have our own boundaries. It's what separates us from the world and makes each of us an individual for what our preferences are, what our likes, our dislikes, the things we hate, the things we love. Um, and so if you're running across somebody who says that they have no limits whatsoever, it's very likely that they haven't explored those for themselves and that they probably have a tendency to go into roles of a people pleaser. And in the role of a people pleaser, a person will end up um, just saying yes, even though it's not necessarily yes for them because they want to keep the other person around. They want to maintain that relationship. They've lost a big part of their identity by allowing their identity to be defined by other people. And this shows up a lot in relationships. There's a lot of very high level societal training that goes into this. And a lot of people can step into the people pleaser role. And I haven't just seen this with submissives. I've also seen this with DOMs. The way I've typically seen it show up with DOMs is more that they'll have a sub come to them, and let's say the sub really wants to explore rope play, but the Dom doesn't necessarily have a preference for rope play themselves. They don't have a strong allure to it. It's not something that fascinates them or piques their curiosity. I will say there's nothing wrong with them trying rope play and topping in that space if it's something where they're like, well, I'll at least try it out once or maybe 3 times to kind of see if it could be their thing and they just haven't tapped into that yet. But if they're stepping into rope play, even though they don't want to be doing a rope, that's the people pleaser on the Dom side, or at least for what I've seen. Another way I've seen this show up is at kink events where there is tastings offered. So this involves tops or DOMs who typically um, are giving free demos, or maybe they're not there as a uh, like qualified taster, but they're somebody who's like giving impact in the space, and then they have these like groups or lines of people come up behind them being like, oh, can you do that to me? Well, I've actually had conversations with DOMs where they're like, I don't want to be doing this for my whole night, or I don't really feel like comfortable doing that with this person. But because they're a top, they'll feel this need that they need to do that for the other person, even though there's a no in it for their system. And again, to me, this falls into that realm of weak boundaries, into people pleasing. And again, if you want to explore that, you have no problem playing with that space, then go ahead. But it can show a quality of weak boundaries within a person's system if it's something they're really not wanting to do on some level, but they're doing it anyway because they feel like there's an obligation that they have to do this thing. When it comes to subs, I remember I had met a female who identified as a submissive a handful of years ago, and we were talking about what they enjoyed in the world of BDSM, about some of their experiences. Um, and I started asking about what their limits were, what their boundaries were with their body. And they flat out told me, I have no limits. And my whole system kind of like shuddered to a stop. And granted, I can reflect in myself when I very first got into this world of BDSM and kink, where I very much so probably would have had the same answer of I don't know, or like just saying like I don't have any, like let's try everything. Well, the thing is like for this person and for me and myself, like there is limits, and there's no right or wrong limits. It's just what limits are right for you. And that means as well that there's what limits are right for your partner. And those limits may not always line up. Let's say um, you really enjoy receiving super stingy sensation, right? Or knife play, but it's something that your partner does not feel comfortable giving. Well, in that respect, it may be a misalignment. Yes, there is the possibility that your partner may decide, hey, this is something like I want to be able to give to my partner. I'm willing to explore what those things are there to learn more about it, and then them pursuing the path that way. That's them finding a genuine interest in it and a genuine intrigue. But again, if it's something they just don't enjoy doing or don't want to explore, if they're now saying, I'm going to do this thing for the sake of my partner just because I want to make them happy, again, like there are other ways to get that fulfilled. I am personally poly, just to clarify, and I know that some of this sort of play can come across for other people as being cheating within relationships, even if there's no specific sexual interactions. I do want to say that kink and BDSM can be very sexual. It also can be insanely not sexual. It can literally just be about an experience, about a set of sensations. You don't have to have um, genitals or sexual or sensation that is specifically aimed at sexual arousal occurring in those spaces. Um, and so there can be that delineation of, let's say, you're this guy who doesn't want to apply stingy sensation or knife play, and your partner really wants to receive that. If you can create that separation for yourself where you don't have to be the only person giving that to your partner, and it's something that you really don't want to explore or learn more about being able to give your partner, then going to a kink event, going to a swingers club, going to a private play party, in those spaces, you can create lines of negotiation with people where maybe you're monogamous, but you can see that your partner receiving stingy impact from somebody else isn't them actually sexually cheating with another person. I like to look at these spaces very much so like body work. I worked in massage therapy for about 6.5 years. And for me, when I first received rope, there was nothing sexual about it. I have since had sexual experiences that involved rope, but I will say probably 90-95% of the rope experience I have had nothing sexual involved in that space. There may have been sensual touch, but it wasn't specifically aimed at creating sexual arousal. And for me, it was this space where I could reach really deep states of meditation. It is the first time I got suspended from rope was actually the first point in time I realized, oh, this is what meditation is. Because I'd always had an issue with being able to just sit calmly and be still in my body, in my mind, in my presence with the world. So it's just a little bit of a reframe. Like that's again, kink and BDSM does not necessarily equal sexuality, but it can involve it. So let's get on a little bit more with these topics of toxic traits. So that first one, again, was somebody not having limits or boundaries about what they want to be experiencing in play spaces. As a side disclaimer to that, people change and evolve over time. So what they are drawn to can shift. A lot of the time, the things people have set as a hard limit are less likely to change. And I don't recommend ever getting into a relationship or play dynamic with anyone if you are expecting them to change to have their needs meet yours or their desires meet yours. Like play with each other where you're at, where you're enjoying. If not, there are other ways to fulfill that that may take creating different understandings around kink and BDSM or poly relationships versus monogamy. Um, but it is all very worthwhile work and play to do within yourself, in my opinion. So, another really big toxic piece that tends to come up in this space has been the belief system that a Dom just tells a sub what to do. Again, this kind of touches into the space of no limits, no boundaries. I don't know how many prospective DOMs I have had conversations with that they just wanted free access to control another person without negotiations. Um, Another piece of this, I remember talking to a Dom at one point in time, and I was like, "Oh, do you have any resources, like any books, any podcasts, anything you would recommend to somebody wanting to explore this lifestyle to gain a better knowledge of what it's about?" And the Dom's response back was, "No, I like to train my subs," which there's nothing wrong with this Dom wanting to train subs himself. But I do recommend like give other resources as well. And especially if they're resources you have enjoyed gaining an understanding from. Again, books, podcasts, um, those sorts of things are great places of information. There's a whole lot of resources on FetLife as well, as far as discussion groups. There's tons of TikTok content and different social media avenues as far as gaining insights and information about this lifestyle as well and these relationship dynamics. But in that, it's this, again, the toxic piece is the idea that the Dom just has control over the sub. You'll also end up hearing, or I've seen it in a meme a whole bunch of time, the idea that a submissive is really the one with all the control because they can call an end to a scene at any point in time, and they have the option to veto an activity. That is true. They do. And the power, even in a power exchange, is equal. I'm going to repeat that again. The power, even in like a DS power exchange, is equal. Either one of those people have the ability to say yes or no. And that doesn't matter if it's before play, after play, or during the middle of it. That is the high value to using safe words if you don't want the word no, stop, ouch, to be indicators that something's not okay for the sub or the bottom. But the thing is, a Dom sub dynamic is a co-created space. You cannot have a Dom without a sub, and you can't have a sub without a Dom. It's very much so, in my opinion, sort of like the yin and yang, or the light and the shadow. Like, you don't have a shadow without light being present. It just doesn't exist. And it is a duality as far as merging together these two different identities in different beings that are coming together to play in a space together. And that means that, yes, while there is a Dom making up half of that, the sub makes up the other half. And they each have their own 100% responsibility of how they're showing up to that space and with that interaction. So again, the Dom doesn't have more control. The sub doesn't have more control. They actually have equal levels of control. And the only thing either of them actually have any control over, just like anyone else in the world, is themselves. Now, from the submissive side, it can look like they are just giving over control. And to me, it is a beautiful gift to offer through submission to say, I feel enough safety, I feel enough trust within my system to let somebody else make the choices for me. But in that, as the sub, there is still the choice point that you are allowing this other person to make those choices. Ironically, in that, like, you're allowing somebody else to make the choices, it's a form of delegation, of responsibility, again, of control. But you are putting trust, you are putting safety within this other person. You are making that choice. And delegation is a huge key factor that goes into leadership as well. So actually allowing somebody, like, let's say you were running a business and you hated doing taxes. Like, for whatever reason, when taxes came up, it was the biggest pain in your ass that you would ever experience. And you're running this small business and you've been like chugging along, making yourself do it because you didn't feel like you could afford somebody else doing your taxes. Well, all of a sudden you decide, hey, I have enough resources that I can afford to pay somebody to do my taxes for me. That's delegation. It's a form of leadership. And in that leadership, you are surrendering a piece of control because, again, there's enough trust, there's enough safety built within that dynamic. for you to proceed forward. I want to give people the space to like recognize that while the dom has the title, right, that is more associated with leadership, being in the submissive role is also a very powerful form of leadership. Let's see. Other toxic things I've seen come up in the DS world, and I will say these also apply to your interpersonal, like partnered relationships as well. Um, Communication, feedback, especially. I have had so many spaces where I've gotten to witness this with other people, witness it in myself, where feedback is something that is not generally asked for, and people aren't great at giving it, but they're, and where it becomes a toxic quality within relationships is where only giving feedback in the form of celebratory feedback. So that's the things we like receiving typically. Um, it's the things that people love about an experience, what they want to receive more of. That is phenomenal feedback to receive. And it feels good to receive most of the time. There is also opportunity feedback, which is the stuff that most people don't like receiving, either because it's presented in very critical ways or because like the person receiving it takes it as being something very critical, and then they are attaching it to a belief system that they are not enough, they're not doing enough, they're not good enough, um, that they're never going to be good enough, they're not lovable, not acceptable, they're not doing enough work, right? They're, especially the I'm enough stories tend to pop out when we feel criticized. And when we're not able, one, to present that sort of feedback, um, we're taking away a key piece of communication that allows the other person to actually grow and expand in who they are. But we're also not speaking to, again, our own boundaries, our own limits, what would have felt really good to receive in that space. And there's some nuanced ways that you can present this feedback. So it's not like, let me try to think of an example real quick. Um, so we're going to go back to the stingy sensation with flogging. Um, let's say I really don't like stinging sensation. A great example of presenting this badly is, well, every time you flog me, you just hit me with stingy impacts every single time, and it's terrible, and like it's awful, and I just hate that. It's not a productive way of communicating. Like, yes, you are, that person is letting you know they didn't like that experience. They are also, I believe the correct word is epitomizing, so making it be everything. If you hear the words always, every time, never, that's they're making it about every single moment that that has ever occurred. And I will tell you, there are very few things in the world that every single time it occurs, it happens that exact same way. So that's not, it's a good way to see where somebody else's story may be popping and taking it actually a little bit less personally. Um, but in that, they're also saying, well, you, and it's placing the blame. So, a way to communicate that same thing, also, tone played a big piece into that. There's a harshness to the tone for the way it was presented. Also, if you'd seen me talking, there was a lot of like actual finger pointing with my body. Um, a lot of the time, I have to incorporate physical movements to get myself into an identity, into speaking in certain ways. But there's there's full levels of communication that happen on more than just the basis of the words, is what I'm trying to get across there. Um, a way to shift that to where that input doesn't feel as critical to receive, but can then be that high value point, would be bringing it back initially to the when this happened. So when you kept hitting my right shoulder with the flogger, with like just the tails of the flogger, right? It produced stingy impact or stingy sensations. I felt or I feel, right? And then hurt, scared, nauseous. Like you can even bring it down to the actual sensation sets that are happening in the body outside of the emotion. So it feels like my skin's going to get torn off, right? And I will say, bringing it actually to the sensation sets can be really, really valuable because you and your partner potentially have two different ways that you feel a certain emotion or different levels you connect with an emotion on. But when you actually describe what the sensation feelings were, so it felt like my shoulder was being cut or like my skin was getting ripped off, right? These are very extreme examples for sensation description. But in that, it actually gives your partner the ability to imagine themselves feeling that. There's this really miraculous thing that our nervous system likes to do with what are called mirror neurons. And it allows us to actually tap into the emotion sensations. If somebody gives us a visual description of what something would feel like when it's applied to our body, we can usually tap into imagining that happening within our own body as well. Side note, also kind of fun space to play with in BDSM dynamics. I don't know how much that is actually done, but also worthwhile. um, you can bring up a lot of stuff within the nervous system, even just having somebody step into an imagined scene within themselves. That's a little bit of a side note. Um, let's see, what else is there? I believe the whole thing with boundaries is probably one of the biggest ones, and it is one of the biggest ones I see on repeat within our society, within my own personal path. Um, Learning my limits was one of those bigger keys that helped me understand how weak my boundaries in my life actually were for what I presented to the world, and how much I was in a people pleaser mode. And just a little side note that doesn't directly involve BDSM and kink. Um, when I started my own personal path, I got in touch with a counselor, and because I knew I needed help around recovering from the loss and some affair situations that had happened with an ex partner. But when I started talking to this counselor, very, very shortly into our conversations, she presented to me. She's like, "Well, it sounds like you have some boundary work to do." And I dead stopped her and was like, "Nope, it's not boundaries. That's not an issue. It's been an issue for me in the past, but it's not an issue in this. We need to talk about all the other things first." And granted, I needed to talk about all the other things first. In that space, about 6 months later, it came back around to her and I working together. And she again looked at me and, or No, she didn't look at me. There was a situation going on in my life, and pretty much it came to a point through her and I talking where I went, "Oh, fuck, boundaries." This has been about boundaries the entire fucking time. Another year later, I actually started my coaching certification. One of the modules within that is going really deeply into understanding your own boundaries, your own power, your own empowerment, tapping into your confidence because you're solid in your personal boundaries and knowing what those are for you. A no is an easy no. It's not something that's strained or that you're having to fight or something you're having to hold up and keep rebuilding a wall around. It's just a no. And again, a yes is just a yes, and a maybe is I need time to figure it out. And that's cool too. Well, in that, I believe the question was like, when I'm being weak in my boundaries, what things happen in my life, what things happen like within me, within the world around me, what I'm experiencing. And I want to invite you to ask this question of yourself as well. But what is happening in your life when your boundaries are weak that tell you you're experiencing weak boundaries? And what I found really interesting about this question was I wasn't really thinking about it as I wrote out my answer. I believe I was actually in the process of putting my son to bed, so my attention was a little bit distracted. But in that, I just started kind of free flow writing, and I came out with a pretty good list for what that looked like. And when I got done with it, I looked back at my list and what I had written, and I started laughing hysterically because everything I had described, again, and for what had been popping up as an issue in my life over and over, even that year after the initial, oh, fuck boundaries, was, oh, fuck boundaries. Like, I was not holding my own limits or my own boundaries. One thing I want to make really clear about this concept of boundaries is that your boundaries are absolutely no one else's responsibility. You can tell somebody your boundary, which can be very kind to do. You don't have to ever tell anyone else your boundaries. But let's say again, with, we'll bring it back to the impact scene that we've been touching on and bringing in stingy impact. Let's say in this instance, I really hate thuddy sensation. And I love stingy sensation, but when I receive thuddy sensation, it makes my skin crawl. I don't want to be in my skin. Like it feels like insects under the layer of my skin. Like I just feel gross in my body. Well, in that instance, like I can communicate to my partner, to the top, to the dom that I'm playing with, hey, like I don't want to receive thuddy sensation at all. And that is kind to be able to do. Then they also get the choice point of, can I only supply stingy sensation? Or can I mainly supply stingy sensation and then a thud every once in a while? Right? And if they can or can't is up to them. But again, like I get to state my boundary, which can be kind to communicate to them, because then they get to know how to show me this space of pleasure in what I'm receiving, because I like receiving stingy sensation in this example. But they also then get their own choice. It's not me telling them they can never give me thuddy sensation, or it's not me telling them they can never give thuddy sensation. It's me just saying, I don't want to receive that. Well, then let's say we went into our next impact session and all they gave me was thuddy sensation. Then that's probably a good signal to me that's not a person I'm going to keep playing with. And it's not aligned. If they're wanting to give thuddy sensation, and that's what moves out of their body when they're swinging a flogger or swinging a paddle or whatever tool it may be, or hand, body part, which is also a tool in this instance, then again, it's just not aligned. It's nothing personal. But I'm the one who gets to hold the boundary of being like, look, like we talked about this. I really don't want to receive this sort of sensation. And like maybe it's better we don't play in that realm if that's not something you're wanting to do or give. That person doesn't owe me anything. It's getting to mutually play in that space together. Again, like boundaries, 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 boundaries. Know your limits. There are also some really great resources if you're wanting to know more specifically about your kinky and BDSM limits, where you can get um, it's pretty much like a spreadsheet for the ones I've seen, but it's a list saying like of all sorts of different kinky and BDSM sorts of play. And then again, it's set up in spreadsheets usually, and I'll say like, I'm interested in doing this. I need more information. So the need more information to me is it's a soft limit, and this is a definite no. I have no interest at all. And you go through and you fill out this list. There's also versions of it where it has the option to say like, I've done this, like enlisting what level of experience you have with it. I call it a BDSM checklist. And it's a good way to get an idea of many different sorts of play that are out there, whether you've considered them or not, and just see what calls to you, what draws you, because not everything will. It's kind of like going to an ice cream shop, right? Like they will say Baskin Robbins, there's 31 flavors. That is their slogan. In that, you're not going to enjoy all 31 flavors. Maybe you will, but most people will have certain ones that they don't like at all, certain ones they really love, other ones that are like kind of neutral, like they would eat them, but they also could very easily go without them. And it's figuring out what that is for you. And then along the way, finding play partners or submissives who also enjoy the same things. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can shift some of these dynamics. And we've talked about that a little bit through talking about the toxic traits that show up as well. So, one, getting really clear on what your boundaries are for you. If somebody else's boundaries, if somebody else's limits don't line up with yours, that's okay. It may just be that, like, maybe you thought you really wanted them as an impact partner and now they're actually a rope partner instead. Or maybe you're just really good friends and you can talk about the BDSM and kink lifestyle together. I really recommend when you're going into creating these relationships with other people, because every single one of them is a relationship, whether you're having sex with the person or not. It's leaving this space of openness, not creating an expectation that this person is going to be in my life as an impact partner and only an impact partner. You're limiting them and you're limiting yourself on what you can be. I have males reach out to me on my social media on a fairly regular basis, wanting to take me on a date, which I actually do not date through any of my coaching sites or social media. It is something I set a very, very solid boundary for myself with because it muddies the ethical waters too much. The thing I find quite interesting within that for a lot of these males who end up reaching out is they'll think that they just want to date me or have sex with me, which is fine. Maybe they do as well. But as we end up talking, it ends up coming out that there actually may be a lot more value for them through what I'm offering in coaching than just as a sexual or romantic partner. And that's up to them to decide if that is the right path for them or not. It's just an interesting point to observe. So, again, boundaries, getting clear on what those are for yourself. If you have never considered what your boundaries are, just start noticing them. There are clear lines in that, and they show up in every area of our life. And again, there's no rights or wrongs in what your boundaries are, only what's right or wrong for you. Communication, being able to speak up for, to stand up for what you really love, and also the things that you don't. How that thing you don't enjoy could shift even just a little bit to be that much more enjoyable and pleasurable. Now, this is something I actually work through with clients as well and kind of get them into the habit of at the end of our sessions. And it's these touch points, and it's setting a specific time for this to happen. So maybe it doesn't happen immediately after play because there's aftercare involved. This could also be a part of aftercare. But it's just that check-in of like, hey, are you open to doing feedback? And then asking the question, what did you really love about that experience? And then the question of like, was there something you didn't enjoy about that experience, even if it was a little shift that could have happened, like 1 to 5% shift? Like, what did you not enjoy and what could have been done differently so you enjoyed it that little bit more? That actually tells another person how to give you more pleasure, how to love you more. Like when you're communicating the things that you enjoy receiving from another person, it gives them more of a roadmap of how to be with you, how to show you love in these ways. And I will say, from my personal experience, I actually had a long time where I would get scared of telling people what I wanted or enjoyed or needed. And in that, it was very interesting because I would tell them these things, and then it was like the opposite would start happening. And I couldn't quite figure it out. But what I want to reflect on here and now is the value point of that for me is noticing, hey, this person's actually giving me all the things I don't want to be receiving. Again, maybe this just isn't the right alignment of a relationship, of a dynamic for me at this point in time. And that's okay too. Let's see. What else is there that wants to come out and forward? We talked a little bit on the spirituality path, and I do want to point out that these dynamics of dominance and submission, like they happen, they have to happen like in conjunction with one another. You can play with your own best dominant and your own best submissive within your own system, and that is an interesting path to explore as well. But where it really stands out and you can make that delineation between the two identities is in relationship to another person. And again, it's coming to the point of neither one is more powerful than the other. They're both equally powerful. They cannot exist without one another. And it's in this space, like what both people are bringing to that relationship is a gift that they're giving. The submissive in giving over, right? Their control, in that trust, and that safety, right? Maybe they're in service and the other person is getting to tell them what they want them to do. and then they're following through and doing it. There's also a large gift for the Dom that they are giving. And to me, that gift is based very similarly to what I've seen modeled in coaching relationships. And I consider a coach to be on very similar lines to a great Dom or a great leader. And that space is more about creating levels of trust and safety and holding for another person to have and be in their experience. Right? So let's say somebody is in an impact scene, and one thing that can happen when people go into DS play is they end up going into what's called subspace, which is an altered state of consciousness. Um, I have experienced what I would consider several different states of subspace, but one of the ones I know happens for people more regularly that I've seen it talked about is where they kind of feel out of themselves, kind of like a very euphoric, floaty state that they are experiencing. Um, but in that space, they may not actually be very connected in feeling and being present in their body. And when that happens, there can be certain things showing up on their physical body or in their breathing rates, in their heart rate, that would act as a signal to a Dom to say, okay, we need to slow down, back off. And part of that is also the Dom's boundaries for the type of space that they are willing to hold. And where I want to make a clear delineation about this is there are some people where they will have a deep core trembling and shaking start to occur within their body. And the Dom will stop at that point. Well, let's say the person had no idea this core trembling and shaking was going on. And again, that was the level the Dom was willing to hold to for creating that container. And for them, that was a signal to stop or slow down to help bring the sub more back down to the ground, we'll say. I've also had the experience, and I've done a lot of inner work with trauma responses, being present with my nervous system in those responses, um, where for me, that trembling and shaking is actually associated with a state of relaxation in my nervous system, and it's letting go of a large amount of tension. If I didn't have the training that I do, or the coaching work that I've gone through and the trauma work I've gone through, then that space would probably be scary for me to connect with because I wouldn't necessarily know what was going on, because it is an automatic response of the nervous system. And we've kind of trained ourselves as humans to not be present with those spaces or think there's something wrong with them and that we need to stop them from happening. But in this one play space, the Dom stopped at the point he noticed trembling. And after that, we got to go through talking and doing feedback. And I was like, hey, by the way, when I have this trembling come up in my nervous system, like if you don't feel comfortable proceeding, by all means, you're welcome to like end the scene and stop. In that, I'm actually comfortable and okay and will bring presence to that. If that happens and we continue to play, or even if that happens in general and you notice the shaking, when we do go into aftercare, I need X, Y, and Z. And then outline it that way. Again, it gives them a piece of communication of if you're actually okay with experiencing this thing or not, how they can improve that experience for you in the future. And like how to provide care for that, because maybe they've never had that sort of body trembling come up before with somebody. Um, Again, it's creating those lines of communication, and you can't do that without the other person. I definitely really recommend, no matter which role you decide to identify with, and even if it's not with another person, playing with the dominant and submissive roles within yourself, playing with that yin and yang within yourself, playing with the masculine, feminine within yourself, playing with the light and shadow within yourself, because there is there are these dualities that exist within all of our systems, and it can be a very expansive place to be with. And one of my philosophies that I take away from coaching, again, is that any of the spaces I lead somebody through, that I guide somebody through, and again, this coach being a leader, being equivalent to a great Dom, I have experienced those myself. And granted, they may feel those in a different way within their body, but when I have experienced those myself, I have a better understanding of the sorts of things that can come up. And let's say I'm in an impact scene, and all of a sudden, like, I have anger start coming up. Like, there's a part of me that gets pissed the fuck off that I'm getting hit right now. And it wants to kick, and it wants to bite, and it wants to just like rip out the throat of another person. I can play with that. I can play with it. Like, I don't have to take that as the end of the scene. Hopefully my partner is willing to play with that too. And I personally try to give forewarning, being like, hey, if this sensation is getting applied over and over to the same area, it's likely to bring up anger. Or there's a certain paddle my partner has, which I really don't like that paddle at all. Again, I don't mind playing with my anger. I just know if that paddle is used on me, it will trigger anger in my system. So if my partner shows me that paddle, I remind him, hey, if you want to play with my anger, then yeah, go ahead, bring that one out. And then again, that gives him the decision point. At that point, like, I again am happy to play with my anger. But the more I integrate my anger, the more I can be present with my anger, the sensations that come along with it, the more I'm able to hold that space for another person, the more I'm able to empathize and understand what their needs may be and how to just be present with them. So I'm going to bring this back to the realm of trauma healing and trauma work, which is very associated with the fear responses, which, if you do not know, are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. There's a lot of information on these, but they are the way that our primal nervous system responds to the world around us, and it doesn't always make sense to our rational brain. But if I am familiar with those, then I can understand more of what level somebody is at within their stress response, within their trauma response to a trigger that's happening. So anger very specifically falls on that fight, flight, freeze, and fawn table. It's typically associated with fight because it tends to be the outward expression, lashing out, hitting, kicking, biting, yelling. Um, there's a lot of narcissistic qualities that can come across in the fight piece of this table. But in that, it gives me a better lens to where somebody else is at. Again, meaning that I get to take it less personally, and I can check in with them like, do you want to keep playing with your anger? If it ever feels too overwhelming, they are always welcome to say, like, Hey, I want to stop. Call a yellow, call a red. And then it's knowing what their aftercare is. If you have not talked about aftercare beforehand, then please check in with whoever it is. My advice is always, always, always consent. So, like, let's say you notice your partner is like sitting down by themselves and they've started crying after a scene has come up. Like, don't just, unless you have discussed this previously and you know it is what they like, don't just run over and give them a hug and hold them and rock them and tell them it's okay and they don't need to cry, right? Like, go over to check on them. Ask if you can sit down next to them. Ask if you can hold them. Ask if there's anything they need. That can be hugely powerful. One, it takes the responsibility off of you. So if you go in to hug them or hold them and they lash out because they're still in some sort of fear response state in their nervous system and they don't want to be touched, you don't actually take it as much of a rejection within your nervous system, within your body. You don't now feel like you got hit because they lashed their arm out and it happened to like slap you in the chest. In that, like, it's that invitation. And if they aren't able to answer you, because there are times that subs go into these spaces and they become nonverbal, they can actually not connect with words, then just be there with them. And again, you don't have to hold them physically in the space. You just being present, you just witnessing them in what they're experiencing and doing that in an open and non judgmental way is one of the most profound ways, one, to create connection, is to just see, hear, accept, understand, and potentially love another person in whatever their expression is. But two, it is also one of the top ways to actually start allowing another person's nervous system, being emotionally rational minded sides, to start healing past trauma wounds in relationships. Because there are so many ways that we end up getting told, like, our expression, our experience, our needs are not okay. And I would be hard pressed to say that, especially most people getting into this lifestyle very early on, especially if they have not done extensive self work in other ways, that like they know how to bring that amount of presence to themselves. So, especially if you are the Dom and you are taking the role of being this space holder, know how to just hold another person in that space without you even actually having to physically hold them. Now, if they look at you and they're like, I want you to get the fuck out of here, I don't want to be around you, cool. Like, again, just allow them to have their space. I had two instances, and this was, again, not a Dom sub dynamic. These were actually complete strangers that I came across in the last 2 weeks, where one, I was out on a walk late at night with my dogs, and there was a girl sitting in the parking strip on the side of a road. And I couldn't see her face as I was walking up, but as I walked by, my dogs kind of like stopped by her because she was literally in the parking lane. And I looked down at her just to see what she was doing, because she's just sitting again in the middle of the parking strip. Like, a car easily could have swerved over a little bit and this girl would have been very brutally hurt, if not dead, potentially. And I stopped and I asked her, like, if she was doing all right. And in that, like, again, this is a stranger. Like, I'm not just going to hug her or anything like that. But I asked, if she minded if I stood there with my dogs. I asked if there was anything she needed. I gave her the piece of advice, unsolicited advice at this, but of, hey, like maybe move up onto the curb so a car doesn't swerve over. This is my mom's side coming out because I am a mom. I came across another lady just a few days ago who was sitting outside of a business, and she was sitting at a table alone just crying. And I did not see another single person walk up to her or even really look her direction, which I find very interesting about our society. But in that, like, I glanced at her a couple times because it looked like she was upset, but I couldn't quite tell because everybody has different tones of skin, things like that. But I decided to walk over to her and just ask if she was doing all right, and then get curious about what she had coming up. And it wasn't me pushing for a conversation. I again told her, like, if you want me to fuck off, like, tell me and I'll kick rocks. It's cool. No offense taken. And we sat there, and I held space for her and let her be with what was coming up. Offered the space of, like, hey, I know a few different resourcing practices you can do. In this instance, she had been having an anxiety attack and was openly talking to me a bit about what was coming up. And I was just like, hey, there's these few different things you can try. And I described them after I asked if she was willing or like open to hearing them, and then invited her to try them along with me. Because then not only did she get to hear about something she could try, she got to do it if she wanted to. Again, it's always an invitation. I recommend, even if it's with your kids, try to utilize uh, invitation. Like, it's not, we don't have to demand things of other people. And that's one of the things that comes across again is this very toxic trait within BDSM and kink relationships. And it's when we invite people into an experience that we allow them to step into their power rather than trying to take their power from them. And again, we come to this balance of the Dom sub dynamic, the black and the white. And it's creating an experience rather than an obligation. It's taking them on an adventure. And in that, for today, I'm going to wrap up. If you are interested in learning more about how your emotions impact your relationships, I really want to invite you to pop over to the About page and go under my resources tab, or down below this video, you will find a link to my resources. From there, you will find a link to the Sovereign Dom email list. And in there, there is a phenomenal series on the sovereign or on empowering yourself through connecting with your anger. And anger for me is a really good example because it's something I struggled with. I got the message for a really long time that anger was not safe to be, to express, to be seen in. And so I disconnected from it a lot. And I talk about my personal experience. I also talk about, again, that fight, flight, fawn, and freeze responses. I believe there's even a diagram in there. But then I talk about how it impacts your relationships, it impacts even your physical well being, in your body health, um, and just how it has impacts across the board. And so, really coming to these places of balance can be so valuable. Please subscribe, like the video. If you know anybody who could value or like find value in this content, I really want to invite you. Please share it with them, like invite them into this space, into these conversations. And the last piece is, what was your biggest takeaway? What was your biggest aha moment, the thing you want to shift for yourself that you get to take away from this experience of this podcast today, comment that below. You can also send me a private message if you don't want to share it publicly. That's okay too. Besides that, if you're interested in working with me on a one on one basis or via group programs, then go ahead and, again, in the resources tab, there you can book a free discovery call. And if you and I are not a good match for coaching, that's all right. I have a massive network of coaches and other amazing resources that can help you along your way. And I am more than happy to sit down, have a chat with anybody about what they have coming up, what it is they're wanting to work towards, and helping them figure out what steps are going to help them the most in the future. All right, until next time, have a good one.